problem with movies about classical music, but it's probably not what you think. As an orchestra conductor, I am convinced that classical music could be legitimately enjoyed by many more people than what it currently is, but there are some barriers of entry that keep some people away, one of them being an image/marketing issue. So every time there is a big Hollywood movie about classical music, I get excited that maybe this is what will make more people curious about it and go check it out. And every single time I leave the movie theater disappointed. Because in general, the way these movies portray the world of classical music ends up making it look even more unapproachable. Now, this is by no means objective criticism, and it doesn't mean that a movie is good or bad, but I needed to disclose this to you because this is the bias with which I went to see Maria. Now, I already knew I wasn't going to get a regular biopic type of movie because of director Pablo Larraín's style. Maria is the third in a line of movies about historical female figures, and the approach to these films has always been non-linear, almost portraying a feeling or a state of mind. And this very much applies to Maria. So I'm going to go through the movie to give you some missing context to really understand what happened to Maria Callas and why she was so impactful in the world of art. And also to give you my perspective as a person within classical music on a topic that often gets mentioned in movies about art, this one included, the idea of art as suffering. And of course we will get into the is Angelina Jolie singing of it all.
Reputation as one of the most tempestuous opera stars in the world.
Well, I don't know what you mean by tempestuous. There's been lots of talk about it too, and I haven't quite understood what it means.
If you quickly read the Wikipedia page for Maria Callas, you will probably learn three things. She was one of the most influential opera singers of all time. She was in a love triangle between Aristotles Onassis and Jackie Kennedy, more on that later, and that she was considered to be a diva. And as the movie starts introducing Maria to us, this sort of prima donna element hits us right in the face with scenes like this one.
I need you to make me an appointment with a hairdresser that doesn't speak. Book me a table at a cafe where the waiters know who I am. I'm in the mood for adulation.
Now, I haven't met Maria Callas, so I can't say what she was like in her private life, but what I do know is the amount of scrutiny and mistreatment that she went through. Because as her career started growing and it was obvious that she was on a league of her own, she started getting a lot of fans, but also a lot of haters. A Time article that came days before she was meant to debut with the Metropolitan Opera included things like a private letter between her and her estranged mother and mentions to her former figure, introducing the fact that she had lost a lot of weight, saying she used to be that fat girl from Manhattan. I feel bad even reading that line out loud. The article also mentions how sometimes Maria will give defiant looks to some audience members, which sounds weird until you keep reading that those audience members came to the performances only to hiss at her while she was singing on stage. She was painted as a diva prone to scandals, but let's take a minute and analyze the scandals listed on her own Wikipedia page. Scandal number 1. Maria successfully fulfilled a 4-concert contract with La Scala. It was such a success that they asked her to do a 5th performance. Due to exhaustion and a previous commitment, Maria refused, but they went ahead and advertised this performance anyways, and when she eventually didn't sing because she never agreed to it, she was vilified for this. Scandal number 2. The night before an opening night, she fell ill and communicated to the opera that they should find a cover, but they responded that it was impossible because no one could be Maria Callas' cover. Due to the pressure of this, she went on to perform but had to cancel mid-performance because she had bronchitis. For this, she was vilified, and it was reported like this.
Rome Opera makes headlines with a performance that didn't happen. Or at least soprano Maria Callas refused to carry on after the first act. Arriving before the overture, here's Maria looking fine. Then Maria Callas says she doesn't feel well. So as not to disappoint you too, our cameraman dropped in on a rehearsal. As you can hear, Maria's voice was perfect. So if you want to be sure of hearing her, don't get all dressed up. Just go to a rehearsal. She usually stays to the end of those.
Scandal number 3. Her relationship with the director of the Metropolitan Opera broke because they couldn't agree on what operas she was going to be programmed for. When asked, he said that Maria was the most difficult artist he had ever worked with because she was so much more intelligent. Other artists you could get around, but Callas you could not get around. She knew exactly what she wanted and why she wanted it. And for this, she was vilified. You know where I'm getting with this. Of course, I wasn't there, and though it is possible that maybe she had a difficult attitude, it is also not hard to see how this constant mistreatment from the press and the what's the opposite of fandom? Hate them, would create this vicious circle where she gets more and more defensive as she gets more and more attacked. And it is worth pointing out that in that same Time article, when they asked people in the industry what it was like to work with her, everybody said that she was incredibly professional, hardworking, and early to every single rehearsal. Now, you could argue that all this criticism is just the name of the game when you're an artist, which brings us to another element of constant scrutiny in her life, her private relationship with Aristoteles Onassis. In a nutshell, after Maria divorced her first husband, she started dating Onassis, and after many years together, during which she essentially stopped singing, they separated and he went on to marry Jackie Kennedy, the widow of JFK. And while I could describe to you how brutally this was publicly covered and the poise with which she would stand it, I can also just show you.
Do you know what I think? I think you're still in love with Onassis.
You're not sorry you didn't?
Did not get married. Give me one good reason why I should marry.
To have him always?
I would not like a man to have him always.
To not lose him to somebody else?
You discarded a husband. You no longer have your lover. You're making a tour, but that is not the compelling thing that it was, and one wonders what is at the center of your life today, Madame Callas.
The center of my life is to be peaceful with yourself.
I bring all of this up for two reasons. One, because if you're not into the Maria Callas lore, it is hard to understand this defensive shield that she wears in the movie. There is one scene where a reporter aggressively asks her a question, but it seems like an isolated incident, and she actually reacts in a very fragile manner and not with the amount of sort of poise and even humor with which she would stand the most ridiculous questions. And the second reason why I think all of this is relevant is because this idea of an artist being difficult for setting boundaries or demanding better conditions is something that we see play out in every generation, currently with Chappell Roan. So here's to hoping that we eventually do learn from our mistakes. In a scene where Maria does eventually go to that bar because she is in the mood for adoration, insert footage of my eyes rolling back as I heard that sentence, she's confronted by an angry fan who complains to her about a concert that she canceled that he was looking forward to attend to as though it was an inconvenience to him. Insert footage of this happening in real time to Chappell Roan. Maria, instead of explaining that she was ill or ignoring him, screams back at him something along the lines of, "You have no idea what it takes to pour music through your mouth." And this is a trope I want to explore that I see very often in movies about music. The idea of art as suffering. Classic FM recently made an Instagram post about the benefits to mental health that come with playing the piano. And professional pianists flooded the comments with essentially lol no. Because lots of classical musicians experience a lot of anxiety and pressure within their profession. Careers can be hectic with a lot of traveling around, which means that you are alone most of the time, making it difficult for you to have a healthy routine when it comes to eating or exercise. And of course, it also comes with a lot of financial instability. And the combination of all of this can have real effects to your mental state when you add that to the pressure that you feel when you get on stage, especially for soloists. On top of this, every performance feels also like a sort of audition because you're hoping that you will get re-invited or recommended to some other company to secure your next job. Being a classical musician requires many hours of being alone practicing, which can come at a cost of building a private personal life aside from your career, which then makes musicians sort of equate their professional success to their success as persons, as people. And so it is really hard to have a bad day in the office perspective when a performance doesn't go well, which adds to the pressure, which adds to the anxiety, which adds to the problem. However, this does not mean that art should be equated with suffering. What I am describing are the current modern circumstances around making art, which can be quite difficult, but which we would hope to change for the better, but they don't apply to art itself. And this is to me a really important distinction to make because often it is equated that you need to suffer as a person to create interesting or good art. In Maria, there is a mention to music being created out of suffering and how happiness never produced good music. There's even a scene where she says that she can't close the door in her head to past traumas because she needs to access them to create meaningful art. And this is what I would like to sort of push back against. As an orchestra conductor, I am perfectly capable to empathize with the feelings that are transmitted in a piece, even have a physical reaction, even shed a tear when I listen to some music. But this doesn't mean that I need to suffer as a person to lead an unhappy life in order to be a good artist. And I actually think that exercising one's empathy to be able to connect with the emotions that are present in a piece and channel them through you is a valuable exercise for us all as members of a society, to train this empathy for an emotion that you're not feeling yourself. Of course, Maria is a movie, it's not a documentary. They have every right to portray this however they see fit. These are just my 2 cents, my personal perspective of how I approach that subject or that idea as an artist in my daily life. Before we can look at Angelina Jolie's singing scenes, we need to talk for 1 minute about what made Maria Callas so special as an opera singer. Before her time, singing was thought as something beautiful, as an instrument that you would use to produce the most beautiful sounds and tones, like a beautifully played flute. Maria Callas was technically perfectly capable of this. She studied relentlessly, but what she brought to the table was vocal expression. She understood the feelings and the motivation behind every single word that her character was singing, and she would use her voice in different ways to better express that precise emotion. On top of this, she was a great actress. She was not afraid to move around if she thought her character needed it. And she had an instantly recognizable voice because her tone was very particular. The color of her voice was very distinct. And the fact that her voice is so recognizable makes it kind of easy to follow in the movie when they used Maria Callas' voice and when they mixed them with Angelina Jolie's voice, and to what extent. The film creators have said that they used a mix of Maria Callas' recordings with Jolie's singing in different levels. Sometimes it would be 1% Jolie, 99% Callas, sometimes 50-50, etc. There is one particular scene where she is singing for her housemaid, and at this point she has lost her voice, and the movie cuts back and forth between the scene in the kitchen and Maria singing on stage in the past. Here the amount of Callas in each scene is quite obvious. When it jumps to Callas on stage is, I would say, probably about 90% Callas, and when it goes back to the kitchen, much less so. The film creators have said that they have always recorded Angelina Jolie on set and then edited that sound later. And in scenes like this one in the kitchen, I can definitely see how that would be the case. There is an opening scene though with a close-up of Jolie where she is singing an aria for a really long time, and here I will say sort of the movements of her face muscles and her throat, it makes me feel like either she was not singing right there and then, or if we take the creator's word that they were always singing on set, then perhaps at that point she was not singing in the most operatic way possible just because of how the muscles move. However, there is clearly a huge amount of work that went into making this as believably as possible, and I will say I think they completely succeeded. Angelina Jolie said she took months of singing lessons, and you can tell that she has learned all the Italian words very, very well. So irregardless of what level of singing she got to, you can really tell that there was a lot of care behind it, and that's all that I can ask for. Most of the elements around classical music are portrayed quite well. Orchestras look legit, conductors look legit. Some elements are overly poeticized, which again, they're in the right. Mostly her meetings with a vocal coach. This is very common. Singers will take lessons with a vocal coach who is a pianist and who will give you feedback on breath control and vowel placement and all these things. And this coach tends to say more, fancy things like, "This is Maria and I want to hear La Callas." And if that was an actual vocal coach, you would ask for your money back. I also really appreciate the amount of opera that they used throughout the film, actual opera numbers, and they did pick them very well to suit the scenes, especially the very last one that we hear where they picked Puccini's Visitarte from Tosca, and this is really, really meaningful because the character that is singing this is saying that she devoted her whole life to art and to music, and in return, she only got pain and suffering. In a recent interview with Bachtrack, Pablo Larraín was asked if he feared the sort of nitpicky criticism from people within classical music. He responded, "The classical music world needs to understand that whatever mistakes we may commit in making movies set in or about classical music, we're putting it out on television and cinema, which is an especially good medium for a generation that might be completely disconnected from this world." So, Pablo, si estás viendo esto, I hope that this video made it clear that I totally agree with that sentiment. This was only my attempt to sort of expand on the figure and the world of Maria Callas and also give my perspective, you know, from someone inside classical music to someone that might not be inside it, and sort of fill in the blanks that I sometimes feel an outsider perspective is missing when they look inwards. But most of all, if any of this, the film or this video, makes you curious at all, please do go check out some recordings of her. I will link some stuff in the description box. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider checking some other videos out, and I will see you next time.